Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Todd Schechter. I'm from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. On behalf of the program committee for this year's Community Exchange, welcome to this morning's talk titled Simplifying Management of Research Data Compliance Requirements with Globus. This morning, we will learn from our presenter, Brigitte Raumann from the University of Chicago, on how Globus facilitates the definition and enforcement of diverse policies, allowing researchers to handle PHI, PII, and other sensitive data confidently while maintaining compliance. At my own university, we're big and growing fans and users of Globus. We think of Globus as the glue that connects various research computing and data repositories, both on our own campus and across the globe. So this morning, please join me in welcoming Brigitte.
Okay, thanks, Todd. So as Todd said, I'm Brigitte Raumann, and I'm the Globus product manager. I'm also our HIPAA privacy officer, and I lead the compliance team there. And thank you very much to the organizers for inviting me today. I'm excited to have this opportunity to present to you how Globus can help you operationalize research data compliance requirements. Let me find the clicker. Okay. So I'm going to start not with compliance and technology. Just want to start by introducing the Globus project so you kind of know what our perspective is and can put the talk in a framework. So this is a very old slide from the 1990s when the Globus project started. I love the logo here. Whoops. Where's the pointer? You know what? I'm sorry. I'm going to use my cursor as the pointer because I think everybody can see that. I love the logo with the URL in it. Started 30 years ago at Argonne National Lab. It was a collaboration between computer scientists at Argonne and University of Southern California. And the goal of the project was to allow researchers to take full advantage of what was then these new ideas of distributed data and grid computing. And they were really motivated by the belief that researchers should have really excellent tools that solve problems that are unique to the nonprofit research community. And fast forward 30 years to today, and Globus is no longer a research project, but our mission remains the same. So we're really focused on providing professionally developed and operated tools specifically for nonprofit research. And we are a unit at the University of Chicago. We are entirely within the university. We're part of the university. We are not a separate entity in any way. We're not a commercial company or LLC or spinoff or anything like that. We are at the university, and we, however, offer these tools and have users really globally. So over these 30 years, adoption of Globus has continually grown. So that now we're widely adopted. For example, in the US, most large research institutions, universities use Globus, and in fact, 60% of the R1 universities are subscribers to Globus. I think all of our national labs use Globus, many federal agencies use Globus, and a number of other research institutions engaged in nonprofit research rely on Globus. So because Globus is a part of so many campus and other institutions' research infrastructure, we've really had a front row seat, or we've actually been along for the ride, the front row seat of how compliance requirements have been changing and really intensifying on research data. Our experience has been started about 8 years ago with HIPAA. And that was the first thing we started hearing from our users from, for example, campus HPC centers coming to us and saying, hey, we need to comply with HIPAA, and how can you help us do that, or can you help us do that? And this was really driven by the fact that the life sciences now had data at a scale where they wanted to also use those cyber infrastructure research resources that the campus was offering, that their physical scientists colleagues had been using for a long time, and now they also wanted to use those resources, but in many cases there was PHI in that data, and so compliance with a HIPAA security rule, privacy rule was required. And at that time, a campus HPC center that actually aligned with HIPAA was a rarity. That was a little exotic at the time. So that was then, and that is really when we started hearing more and more about compliance and research data. This is now, over the last 8 years, we have now, HIPAA's still important, but there are a whole host of frameworks, programs, control catalogs, regulatory requirements, acts, that all trickle down to compliance requirements for research data. So what is driving this intensification? So there are a couple reasons. One is there's just a societal shift to more focus in cybersecurity. You look at any, I didn't even bother putting up a chart because we all know you look at any chart where you look at number of breaches or you look at the cybersecurity market or the number of papers published on the topic, it's just exponentially growing. And also the value of data across society is being recognized. And so what does that mean for research data? Research data is also more and more being recognized as an institutional asset. It's not the PI's research data anymore, right? It used to be that was the PI's data, that was an institutional asset. The PI was signing the data use agreements. It was really something that the PI sort of owned, but that's really changed. And research institutions are recognizing that that's an institutional asset that needs to be protected, and that they have some role in stewarding that data. Also, another driver is there's just more regulated data now in research data. There is controlled unclassified information, there's personally identifiable information, export control, human genomic data. There's just more data which is regulated now in research data. The last 2 points have really, in my experience, have really started becoming important in the last 3 years or so. And that is a shift in not just one, several regulatory frameworks, shifting the focus from high-level guidance to very specific requirements, very specific controls. So it's not, 10 years ago, it was the NIH guidance was to the PI, and it was make sure you control the access, make sure you authenticate who's accessing, and make sure they're authorized, right? And now each one of those 3 topics have several controls that need to be followed from the NIH. So much more specific. And then secondly, importantly, those regulations have shifted responsibility from the PI alone to a shared responsibility between the institution and the PI. So those drivers, plus all the different types of compliance regulations, mean that universities can no longer consider research data compliance at the fringes or the margins. It also can't be done manually or ad hoc. It really needs to become a core primary consideration when thinking about the architecture of research cyber infrastructure. So about 5 years ago, we recognized that and responded to that, and we ourselves, for our own infrastructure and our own environment, became HIPAA compliant. So our organization operates our services in a HIPAA compliant manner. But importantly, we also added features to our product that lets you comply with regulations more easily. And so over those 5 years, we've seen a significant shift in our subscribers so that now 40% of our subscribers subscribe at a level where they intend to use or are using Globus with sensitive research data. So that's our high assurance level, and then also specifically for PHI, our HIPAA BAA subscriptions. So why use Globus at all for sensitive research data? Why are we seeing that shift? Why are so many subscribers moving to Globus? Why might you as well? So in order to answer that, I'm going to step back a minute and say, okay, what is Globus? If you're not a user or haven't heard of it before. So Globus is, at the highest level, it offers capabilities to researchers that let them take full advantage of the research cyber infrastructure they have available to them. And we do that in a number of ways. If you have heard of Globus at all, you know it as a managed transfer service, and it certainly is that. That's how, those are the roots of the Globus project, and that was our very first software as a service we offered in 2010. But since then, we've added many more capabilities. We've added unified data access, collaborative sharing. You can use Globus to share data. We have software tools and frameworks that you can use to publish research data. So, for example, if you're supporting a data portal or science gateway. Also, we provide tools for interfaces to allow researchers to search for research data and find what they're looking for. We have a service that provides unified access to the compute resources that researchers have, not just their storage, but also their compute. And then lastly, we have a service for reliable automation of the tasks across the data life cycle. So I'm not going to talk about each of those today. I don't have time, but what I'm going to focus on is our sort of data-centric services. So that's transfer, sync, sharing, and then I will talk about automation and how that can be applied as well to compliance requirements. All of this is offered both as a software as a service, so you can access these services through our web app or our command line tools. It's also a platform as a service. All of these services offer APIs, and if you have applications that you'd like to integrate these capabilities into, you can do that through our APIs and our SDKs. Okay, I'm going to start with transfer because it's most people know it, and I think it also illustrates some of the principles of our other services as well. So first of all, why use Globus for data transfer, for research data transfer? Well, it is targeted, or it solves a lot of the challenges that are somewhat unique to research data, right? So first of all, what are some of those challenges? Well, scale is an obvious one. We all know research data can be very large, and Globus reliably moves very, very large data sets, so hundreds of terabytes. Platform is the other challenge. So researchers have their data in many places. Campuses offer many types of storage to their researchers, right? Cloud storage, the data's on their laptops, it's in the lab server, the Windows server, it's in the core facility of the university, for example, maybe tape archives, maybe at a national facility. So it's really all over. And each of these different storage platforms have very different interfaces to access that data. And so it's important that the researchers don't need to learn each of those interfaces. That's not their interest. They don't have time for that. And so we provide a single interface to all of those types of storage, and the details are abstracted away from the user. The storage looks identical to them, whether it's an S3 bucket or their laptop or a tape archive, for example. Speed is another. So Globus is designed to really let you take advantage, if possible, of those fast networks, those 100 gig, 10 gig networks. And security and compliance. So another focus we have is to make sure that all of our services offer secure and compliant capabilities. And researchers want to be secure and compliant, certainly, but it needs to be easy, right? It needs to be easy for them, and we focus on that as well. Okay, so taking transfer as an example, I'm going to walk through a data transfer and show you how it can be used, right, to remain secure and compliant, and what the advantages are of using Globus for data transfer. So first of all, how would a user do a transfer? So they would log into Globus, and when they log in, they can use their institutional identity. We provide federated identities. We integrate with CI Logon, And we also integrate directly with a number of other identity providers. So chances are good that the researcher will find their institution as one of the institutions they can use to log into Globus. So they log into our services, and then they send a transfer request to our services. For example, here, this researcher might send a request to, where's my cursor? To move data from, let's say, an instrument facility to some compute resources they have. And what Globus does when it receives that request, it ensures that the user is authorized, of course, to access that data. It applies any data policies that are either have been configured within Globus or locally at the storage system. And the user can just walk away and forget about the transfer until Globus emails them that it's done. And in the meantime, Globus will tune performance parameters. The researcher doesn't need to worry about making sure the transfer is reliable, right? Because Globus will retry if there's a network interruption or a system goes down. It's maintenance day, for example. Globus will also, there we go. It also ensures integrity. So again, another compliance requirement. It will verify that the integrity of the data is good after the transfer is done. So it makes sure that the data at the source is identical to the data that arrived at the destination. Another thing I want to point out about this diagram here is you'll see that our Globus cloud-hosted services, sorry, this cursor, interacts, it communicates with the storage systems, and that's by virtue of an agent that we provide that would be installed in a location that can see that storage. It communicates with the storage systems, but the transfer itself is a direct transfer between the two storage systems. It's a peer-to-peer transfer. The files themselves are never accessed or seen by our cloud-hosted service, even transiently, even during the transfer. So that limits your exposure to a third party. So you're not exposing those files to a third party. I will say we do store the file names and the file metadata, and that's we need that to monitor the progress of the transfer, of course, and ensure that everything has been transferred. But we never see the files themselves, the file contents. The other point here I want to make is that there is a unified view. The researcher has a unified view of their storage. So they can use Globus to move data, just drag and drop in a web interface between any one of these different types of storage systems, high-performance computing, storage, many of the cloud, like the big three cloud providers, not just their large cloud storage, but also their sort of file sharing platforms, OneDrive, Google Drive, Box, Dropbox. Tape archives we support, institutional storage, and they can even use Globus to move data from or to their laptops or personal computers running Linux, Windows, or Mac. So very easy to, for example, drag and drop between an S3 bucket and Google Cloud, which isn't always that easy to figure out, but it is with Globus. Okay, so that's transfer. I want to talk about another important topic, which is data sharing. So even as these compliance requirements and access control and authorization are intensifying, research is by nature very collaborative, more and more, I would say more and more collaborative as time goes on. And so it's really essential for the research mission of the university to enable data sharing, including sharing of sensitive data. Enable it responsibly and compliantly, but it's no longer a solution to say you can't share data, you can't share your sensitive data, right? So a lot of universities use Globus for sharing data, including their sensitive data, and common use cases are ad hoc sharing. So there's this one-off data set that a researcher might want to share with collaborator at another institution, or they may want to share it internally with their lab. Another very common use case we see where Globus is applied is multi-institutional collaborations, where a set of institutions need to share data amongst themselves. We've seen everything from supporting 3 institutions to 50 or more institutions. One project, for example, an NIH project of maybe 35 institutions, they use Globus for sharing and for enforcing the sharing policies of the project. So for example, one policy is that data has to be embargoed. So the institution within the project that generates that data, only researchers at that institution initially get access to that data. After a period of time, all of the institutions within the project can have access to the data. And this is all enforced through Globus sharing permissions. And then after a period of time, again, that data is moved through Globus to a data repository and shared publicly after the sensitive data is removed. Again, all using Globus. So let's talk about why people might use Globus for sharing sensitive data, and I'm going to walk you through a sharing scenario. So that researcher who transferred their data to the compute resource, they did an analysis, and now they want to share that data with a collaborator. They would log into Globus, and all they need to do is within the Globus interface select the user they want to share the data with, or they can share it with a group. So you can manage sharing permissions using groups. And that's all that the user needs to do. What Globus does is take those sharing permissions and uses it as an overlay on the underlying storage. So Globus never changes the local storage policies. Those sharing permissions are layered on top of the local storage policies. From a collaborator's point of view, what happens is they receive an email automatically from Globus saying, Brigitte shared data with you, here's a link to go view the data. And that collaborator would log into Globus, again using their institutional identity, and they can view and browse that data using Globus. And if they like, they can move the data to their own institution or move it to wherever, for whatever purpose the data was shared for. So a couple things to note in particular, especially when it comes to compliance about this flow. First of all, there was no need to create a temporary account, right? So you can respect least privileges. You don't need to create a temporary account that often has more privileges than it needs, right? Because the only privilege the collaborator needs is access to a single folder, and it just needs to be read access, and you can enforce that using Globus. So no temporary accounts to manage and to forget to delete or remove when they're no longer needed. The other thing that didn't need to happen in order to share data is none of the data needed to move anywhere, right? It is shared right where it's sitting in place. Didn't need to move to file sharing platform. The researcher didn't need to move it into Box or Dropbox or anywhere else. You can share where it is at the institution. So those transfer and sharing capabilities that I've just described are used by several campuses to secure their secure enclave. So these are enclaves specifically for sensitive data like PHI, controlled unclassified information, and many institutions, and this is not all of them, this is just some of the institutions that are relying on Globus and offer Globus to their researchers to move data in and out and to share data from their secure enclave. So we're seeing more and more universities adopt Globus for their secure enclave, and when you look at our usage, we also see more and more users accessing sensitive data using Globus. And you can see this is over the last 5 years from when we first offered our sensitive data product, and you can see it's really starting to take off, and I think it'll just continue growing. And when you look at usage specifically for sharing, you also see an increase in that. So in this case, the Orange bars are the number of users that are accessing their own data, and the blue bars are the number of users using Globus to access, use our sharing mechanism. So collaborators accessing data that's been shared with them. And so that's increasing as well. Just take a quick. Okay, so I've talked about sharing, transfer. There's another service we offer that I think really has a lot of potential for enforcing compliance policy, and we're seeing a number of universities start adopting it for that. And that is our automation platform. Flows is what we've called the service, and it is a managed, cloud-hosted, one of our cloud-hosted service for reliable task orchestration. So unlike some other sort of workflow services, what is somewhat unique about Globus is that you can build a pipeline of steps across different institutions, across different systems. It can move from AWS, it can to your data portal that you've got on-prem. It's extensible. You don't have to just be confined to Globus services. You can use other services. For example, we have flows that integrate DataCite digital object identifiers. It can also have a human in the middle. You can have a step where the flow pauses and waits until there's some input from a human. So you can imagine how that would be helpful when thinking about how to enforce compliance policies. So a number of universities have come to us with this use case where we can apply flows. And the use case is very simple, and that is somebody needs to approve egress of data from a secure enclave. So there has to be an approval step. And really, this should be as easy as possible for the researcher, right? It needs to be fairly transparent. They don't want to fill out a special form to request approval and then move the data. It just needs to be as easy and automated as possible. And you can use flows to do that. The first step would be in the flow that the user authenticates. Then the user submits to Globus a transfer request. Says, hey, I want to move data from the secure enclave to this, let's say, National Supercomputing Center. Instead of executing that transfer, what Globus does is execute a flow. And this is configured by the local storage admin. So this is configured a policy that can be set by the institution that any transfer request kicks off a particular flow, for example. And so that flow then, rather than performing the transfer, it sends an email to a data steward or a data admin, and then the data admin can review that transfer request, and they can either input through the web to authorize that request, in which case Globus performs the transfer, or deny that request, in which case an email is sent to the user notifying that the request has been rejected. So that is data egress. There is also a use case that we've seen for data ingress, and this is from the University of Western Australia. This is their flow. They have a policy, and the high-level policy is that in our secure enclave, no files can have viruses. So how do you operationalize that policy? Well, what that means operationally is that every file, before it comes to the secure enclave, needs to be virus scanned. Okay, how do you do that? How do you operationalize that? And again, you can use a flow to do that. First step of this flow, again, user submits a transfer request. It's completely transparent to the user that a flow is going to be kicked off, and there are all these steps, and then finally their data will arrive. They just submit the transfer request. What happens as the first step of the flow is the flow determines whether the source of the data is a trusted source. So there are some sources at the University of Western Australia that they trust have already had virus scans. So these are some internal storage, campus storage, other systems where they know a virus scan has already been done. And if the flow determines it's from one of those sources, it goes ahead and does the transfer. If it's not from a trusted source, a source that the flow doesn't recognize, rather than doing the transfer, it creates a subfolder in a quarantine area. It transfers the data to that subfolder. It then kicks off the antivirus scan. That uses our compute service to execute that scan. And then, depending on the results of the scan, the uninfected files then move on to this last step of the flow, which is transfer, and they get transferred into the secure enclave. The infected files, then the HPC center is alerted that they're infected files, and they do not move, obviously, into the secure enclave. So this is another good way you can take your high-level policy requirements and turn them into sort of easy, scalable operations. All right. I'm going to talk about the fact that we're a hybrid SaaS, which means some shared security responsibilities. So you may have noticed Globus is not strictly a software as a service in many cases. In many cases, our services interact with sort of on-prem or local resources. Not necessarily local, they can be cloud resources, but in any case, they're resources that Globus doesn't own or operate or control, right? So we obviously own, operate, control our cloud-hosted services. They happen to be hosted in AWS, doesn't really matter where they're hosted. And then they interact with resources, the cyber infrastructure, for example, that you offer your researchers. So Globus is an orchestration layer, really, between all of these different resources. And so you can apply the same policies. You can use Globus to apply policies to your high-performance storage, but you also can use Globus to apply policies to the Google Drive workspace you might offer, or to the box storage you might offer to your users, et cetera. So what that means, though, is that you are owning the environment, this environment, right? For example, we'll say the compute resources or the storage resources. We own and operate this the cloud services, and what that means is there's a shared responsibility for the entire system, right? So that's shared between our subscribers, our users, and ourselves. So just a brief one slide about how we secure our system. So we operate our services that's aligned with the security rule and the HIPAA privacy rule, and as an organization, we comply with HIPAA. That includes all the training and background checks and sanctions, for example. It includes all of these. We follow the NIST catalogs, 800-171 and 853 for our security controls at a moderate baseline. We also, what I didn't mention earlier, were not just security compliance requirements are mounting, but also privacy requirements, right? GDPR was one of the first, but now every state has passed their own data privacy law, and some of those will apply to research data, and they certainly apply to your users. So when your users log into Globus, we have their name, we have their email address. That's really the only PII we store, but nonetheless, we follow GDPR and other privacy laws to protect that data. So where was I? So we follow these compliance regimes, those security control catalogs, and that's how we secure our services. And we will sign HIPAA BAAs attesting to that, and we sign information security agreements and data protection agreements. But what's really interesting probably to you is how we help you comply and how we help you secure your environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about all of the different ways, the policies you can set that help you comply. And if you are very familiar with compliance, you will recognize how I'm organizing these. So first of all, let's talk about access control and least privileges. And some of these I've already touched on, some of them I haven't. So there's layered access control. So First, there's the control that you get at the identity provider at your institution. Then there are the controls that you set in Globus, so all of the policies, data access policies, sharing policies, et cetera. And then, of course, the local account policies are always respected. You can deny or allow users, right? So you can very specifically let only a subset of your users use Globus, for example. You can also deny or allow paths. So you don't need to expose your entire file system to Globus. You can just use Globus to manage a very specific part of your file system if you like. And you can also get very specific. You can say which user can access which path, for example. We offer multiple roles within Globus, each with more narrowly scoped access, anywhere from the admin to just a monitor role. As I mentioned, you limit your exposure to third parties. We don't see the files, for example, that are transferred, and you don't need to move your data to a sharing platform. Specifically, when thinking about sharing, that limits your exposure, again, to third-party vendors. And you can restrict data movement, if you like, to only allow data movement to other Globus storage systems that also operate under this high assurance subscription. Sharing policies, I just want to focus a little bit more narrowly. Those are really important and they are very often used. So I mentioned they're narrowly scoped. It's folder access, no temporary account, and you can enforce that it's read access only. So when a researcher shares, they don't need to share write access if you don't want collaborators writing to your institution. You can enforce who can share, right? We have institutions that don't allow their researchers to share unless they've gone through training, right? So they have a particular group and that's managed through Globus policies, and that's the group that can share their data. You can also set a policy that the sharing permissions are time limited, so they expire. And you can set what that expiration time is, so you don't have any sort of sharing policies that are no longer necessary, for example. You can also automatically remove guest collections, which is our mechanism for sharing data. You can automatically remove guest collections researchers have made that aren't used anymore. So they're orphaned, maybe the researcher has left, maybe the purpose for sharing the data is no longer valid, but you can automatically clean those up. So there are no orphan sharing permissions, for example. There's no oversharing. We also have roles that allow delegation of sharing permissions. So if the PI doesn't want to manage the sharing permissions, they're busy, they're maybe not the best person, right, to organize them. For example, in a multi-institutional trial or project, you might have a project manager that is better equipped to know and to manage and to record the sharing permissions, and so you can delegate that. And we have group-based sharing permissions, I mentioned that, and with our high assurance subscription, a public and anonymous sharing is just restricted, period. Identification, authentication, I mentioned, federated identities. Globus isn't collecting or storing any credentials. It also lets you be comfortable with the assurance level that's being provided. So you know it's your organization that's setting that level. And beyond that, you can define which identity providers you trust, right? So if most institutions, I would say, only allow their users to authenticate to Globus with their institutional credentials. You can also apply that to the collaborators, right? You can control which IDP the collaborators may use. So if you don't want sharing with, let's say, Gmail accounts, you can restrict that by policy. If you want to only limit sharing to the institutions that are part of a multi-institutional project, you can restrict sharing to only those institutions. You can enforce MFA for data access. The authentication sessions are time limited. So you, by policy, can set the time of how often researchers need to re-authenticate. Could be an hour, could be a day, could be 30 days. We've seen the whole range, but that you can set by policy. As well as the sessions are also isolated. So by application. So if, for example, a Chrome has been compromised on a researcher's phone, that does not bleed over into the other applications on the phone, the other browsers on the phone. It also doesn't bleed over to Chrome on their laptop. So it's application and device isolated. Just a couple more slides. I'm doing okay with time, good. Audit and accountability. So you have a very detailed record of the transfers. Every transfer you have all of the activity, who transferred, where that was transferred to or from, not just what at your institution, but what the other side was. And you can get a list of every file that was transferred, if you like. There is real-time monitoring of those transfers, so we offer an admin console where you can actually see the transfers going in and out of your system, who's doing the transfer, and you can use that also to pause a transfer, cancel a transfer, suspend a user, so you have some real-time control. We also provide audit records for not just transfers, but all data access. So this records, every directory listing, every folder rename, every folder deletion or creation. And it records not just what your researchers have been doing, it also records every event that a collaborator does and identifies the collaborator's identity. And then we also provide usage reports. Those are great for charts and looking at your usage, but they also come with a historical record, a summary of every transfer ever occurring in and out of your system. I don't know why encryption is my last slide. It's certainly one of the most important compliance requirements and security controls. But we encrypt all communication, all information. So we encrypt our communications with you, TLS encryption, and the data transfers that are direct, that don't interact with our services, those are also encrypted. So that's forced encryption. And as I said, we check, you can enforce by policy, if you'd like, that every transfer, when it's done, the data integrity is verified. So you're sure there's been no data corruption or loss during the transfer. And I am doing perfect on time, so I am going to move on to my last two slides, and I want to make a very special thanks to our subscribers. So Globus has been sustained for the last many years, and not just sustained, but thanks to our subscribers, we've been able to grow. We've been able to continually add more product features and really continue to add value to Globus, and that is really thanks to our subscribers. And there are a lot of institutions represented here that are subscribers, and I want to thank all of them. They're not all represented on the slide, or it's not room, but I do want to thank all of our subscribers. And last, if you have any questions, I'm sure we'll take questions, but also feel free to email me, braumann@uchicago.edu, or just email our help desk, support@globus.org. We have a great technical support, and also they will route any, if you mention my name, they'll route those tickets to me, no problem. Okay, so I am done. And happy to take questions. I'll also be around afterwards if anybody wants to talk to me. Questions, anybody? Yeah, I think we're supposed to come to the mic. Thank you.
One of the things we're thinking about with CMMC Level 2 is making the transfers, but also vetting where it's transferred to. Are there any tools or anything within Globus that we could use to kind of use that to get that attestation piece from the end site?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what you want to do. So by vetting, do you want to restrict which locations the transfer can go to? You can do that using a flow, for example.
I guess what I'm thinking of is, a researcher wants to transfer it to another institution, and we need to have them ensure that they're going to have controls on their end before we can open it up.
Right. So again, if you have that list where you've gotten assurances, that is easy then to manage through a flow. If you don't have that list, you can pause that transfer, again, through a flow. It's just that automation flow I showed. Then someone from IT can step in and say, hey, we've never transferred to Swarthmore. We just need to contact Swarthmore and make sure that we're comfortable with the security. You can also restrict transfers to only Globus collections that have that high assurance subscription. So that gives you a baseline. There are some policies that you won't know how they were configured, and you might want to check, but there is a baseline level of security if they're transferring to a high assurance collection.
Thank you.
Sure.
So my institution, University of Illinois, we have one of the secure enclaves you noted that was built for HIPAA. We're working to do CMC level 2, and we also have a cloud one only for CMC level 2. And we're starting a pre-assessment, and we got asked about FedRAMP moderate with Globus because of the metadata as a concern. So wondering about that.
Do you have, is it for CUI? Do you have CUI in the metadata?
Yes, it is CUI data. That is the concern that came up. Is great that the data is not actually flowing, but
right.
Metadata itself.
Understood. I mean, and that's frankly why we needed to be HIPAA compliant as well. We're not seeing the PHI in the files, but we are seeing the metadata, and of course, patient information can be in those file names, so I understand. So we are kind of at the point with CMMC level 2 that we were with HIPAA, right? We're starting to hear a lot of questions about CMMC level 2. We're starting to investigate it. We are getting some third-party assessments of what we would need to do to reach FedRAMP moderate. That is not a small undertaking, FedRAMP moderate. That is a large, that is another sort of evolution, I think, in our compliance program, and we need to be sure that we can sustain that with our subscribers. So aware of it, thinking about it. So I'm curious, is your environment on AWS Gov, your cloud environment, is it in
Cloud
AWS? And if
Azure.
so, is it GovCloud?
Nope, it's in Azure at the moment.
It's in Azure. Okay.
Azure Glove Cloud.
Okay.
So you're not quite to the point where you'd even guarantee you're going to do it yet.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
You're not to the point where you'd even guarantee you will do FedRAMP moderate yet, depending
That's
on
right.
how your assessment comes back on the level.
That's right. We're not quite there yet. We might get there. I'm not ruling it out. We're seriously considering it, but I can't stand up here and tell you we guarantee we'll be FedRAMP moderate.
Thank you.
I'd like to, but I can't. Yeah, thanks.
I was just going to add, if you need another university that would plus one, that UW-Madison would be, say, exactly the same, and we're building in the same type of Azure environment.
So that's really useful to know because, like I said, it's a big undertaking,
Yeah.
and we need to make sure that there are enough subscribers
Yeah.
who would use that if we
Yeah.
offered it. So
Yeah, yeah.
great, thanks.
Does Globus work with Nextcloud?
Does Globus work with Nextcloud? Vas, do you know? Oh, Nextcloud, yes. No, so it does not. I don't think. I can get back to you to make sure, but we've had, like, every 2 years or so, we've had that question, and I don't think that it does. But if you come up afterwards, I'm happy to give you a straight, confirmed answer of that. Yeah. Anything else? Great. Well, thank you very much for your attention.